This is my 1994 Mazda Miata. And this is a heater core assembly. That's right. The heater core is leaking and we need to replace it. At the beginning of the summer, I ran my Miata one day and the floor well was completely soaked. And I looked down there and I could tell that the seepage was coming from my heater core, so I knew that something had broken loose. When I had purchased the car, it had been seeping a little bit, but I found that it wasn't from the heater core itself. It was from kind of a bent up pipe that went through the firewall. And so after I readjusted those, so here are the pipes in question. They're very soft. They're like a copper or brass metal, and they bend very easily. And you may notice way in the back here these grommets. Those were missing completely. So what was happening was you get a little seepage, and it would just travel down the pipe itself into the cabin and start making things all wet. Now this was just a little bit. There's a little bit of dampness. So if you have some dampness, you may want to check for that first. The other sign of a heater core leakage is you're getting, when you turn on the heater or something like that, you get a lot of condensation on the windshield. And so, and also you'll smell that kind of coolant, sweet coolant smell. So you want to check that first. Make sure you have a heater core problem, an actual problem with the internal heater core before you go doing this job, because even though in a Miata you can do it without taking out the dash, which is what I'm going to show today, it's not a fun job. So let's get to it. So like I said, at the beginning of the summer, I noticed this and I'm like, hey, yeah, I don't need a heater right now, so I'll just deal with this later. And what I ended up doing was just a bypass. Now a lot of people make a bypass up themselves. They get some hose, they get some fittings, they get some miscellaneous stuff. I found that's not really necessary, assuming your hoses aren't in terrible condition. Well, mine are pretty new, and all I did was sort of, this is the hose from the back of the block, the normal hose that would connect up here, and I just sort of manhandled it around so that it fit down on this inlet down below that then goes under the exhaust, and then it goes through to the mixing manifold and the water pump at the front. And so with some rotation, I just twisted this around. And what I did was I got a little wire here just to hold it up so that it wouldn't sag. When it heats up, it would start to kind of sag a little bit because it got softer, and kink just a little bit. Flow, you know, was impacted somewhat. So what I did was I just got a little wire, wrapped it around, and just hung that up here from these brake lines. So then I took the other hose and just capped these off just so that it wouldn't get dirt in there. I also went ahead and took my wet vac and just sucked all the coolant that was in there out so that it would stop leaking, and then when I removed it, it would be pretty much dry. And so that's what we're going to start doing today. So there's a couple of approaches you can take when replacing the core. Getting a new sort of copper core for like an NA Miata 90 through 97 is a little expensive to get new. You basically have to get it from Mazda. It's about $350. So what I opted to do was buy this unit, which is a used unit. You can get it off of eBay. I got it from Treasure Coast Miata, yeah, where they sell parts and stuff off of reclaimed Miatas. And this one came off of a 96, and it's in reasonable condition. This is how it sits in the car, basically like this, actually a little bit tilted forward. So here's where your air attaches to and everything. Your center console tombstone is right here, and then this is down right above the transmission tunnel. This is where the bottom air vent is, and then you have the little lines, mechanical lines on an NA that connect down along here, clip in right there, and physically actuate the little doors that redirect the air. So what we want to get to, in this case, I don't really need all the plastic stuff. What I need is the core, which is under here, and it should be the same inside the car, but it's easy to film here, and we'll show you what we're going to do. So flipping this over to its side, you remove a couple screws here that hold this cap on, and we can just lift this off and expose our somewhat corroded, used, but hopefully not leaking core. And we'll need to take off these brackets, and you'll see that one side has this hose fitting right here, which allows this whole tube to come off, this top tube. But this tube is just welded onto the core, and the old core is not going to come out of the car with this on, at least not without. The normal way would be to remove the whole dash. That's the only way for this to come out, because it has to basically come out first backwards so that this can clear the firewall, and then you can take this out. The way we're going to do it is we're just going to slide this out through the footwell, and to do that we're going to have to cut in to this. So let's first get some of these off, and we'll see how it works on this core, because what I want to do is potentially compare this one with mine and see which one is less screwed up. These things get bent. In fact, this one is sort of bent. If you look at it, it's sort of flattened on one side, which means that it won't quite seal. So we're going to see if we can pick the best of the ones that I have, or we can probably jam something in here like a socket and kind of tap it out. It takes very little pressure to manipulate this metal, so because it's thin and it's just, like I said, copper or brass or something like that, and so we can probably pound these out to round. Alright, so we've taken off these little clips, and we've also taken out the screw that holds on this little spring clip, and this came off relatively easily. If you have a tool like this, which I picked up from Harbor Freight, a couple bucks for, a few bucks for a set of 3 different sizes. Here's a couple of them. I used the larger one. Basically, you can get it onto the rubber and just sort of gently twist back and forth to break the seal. Once the seal's broken, it should more or less come off. And so I was just kind of able to wiggle it back without too much difficulty and pop that sucker off. When you go to install these, you're going to want to use a little bit of silicone lubricant, and spread some around the outside of the pipe and such, and then it'll go right on. It'll just slide on perfectly. So I'm going to go over here to the car and remove the worm clamps that we have on here for this hose. You may still have the stock tension clamps, which require a plier to just kind of squeeze and then pull back, but in this case I have the regular clamp. So I like to use a little extension like this, which is flexible, and a 6mm. Instead of messing with a flathead screwdriver to try to get this off, you can just get it off with this pretty easily. So we're going to do that and take off our grommets to preserve them so they don't get torn. So now we're going to want to clear out everything in the car. So I'm going to take the seat out. It's 4 14mm bolts, no problem. And if you have the option, you may want to take off your steering wheel as well. Even a stock steering wheel is fairly easy to remove. There's about 4 screws that hold it on from the back, and then I forget the size of the steering wheel nut that has to come off, but it's not too big a deal. And it may make it a lot easier. But in my case, all I have to do is take off these small little Allen screws, and then the steering wheel will come off. All right, with that accomplished, it gives us more room to work. So we're going to get in there with a couple of Phillips heads, different sizes, and a light, and be able to get in there under here to the old thing. And I've got the cap off already, and I just need to release those screws, and then we'll see where we need to cut to get the that one pipe that's welded on out of there. All right, so with a little judicious wiggling, you can get your clamp on here and kind of just wiggle upwards, and then at the end you can kind of just push it off and it should come off. And we've got our pipe right here, and we can just remove this out all the way and lay this to one side. Okay, so now you want to plan how you're going to cut out the that remaining pipe there. And what I've got, you've got a couple options. What I've got is a kind of multi-tool, reciprocating tool, and what this will do is it'll do like kind of a plunge cut with this. This is a good sized blade for it, and you want to plan before you even attempt to turn it on. Just kind of plan your angle and where you're going to cut right there, like that. Make sure you have room for your tool. You could also use a Dremel tool, or potentially there's enough room to use one of those spin-off plumber's pipe cutting tools, where you kind of spin it and then torque it down and then spin it again and it cuts. So we're going to try that. Since I may want to reuse this pipe because it might be better than the one I have, I'm going to cut it at sort of the lowest possible point against the core. Since we know we're ditching the core, we can just cut it so that the pipe itself is as long as possible, and then we'll trim it down as necessary to match wherever we think we need to cut the new core. All right, little cutting, little wiggling, and that's off. So now you can see that this guy is now free to move about the cabin. So the main thing that's going to be in your way pulling this straight back is this giant loom right there. So we're just going to get in there and kind of wiggle it out. See what we can do. Well, that was easy. Really, that loom was barely in the way. It just sort of slid right out. I left some miscellaneous foam, which just turned to goo right here. But, you know, other than that, we have the old heater core. Delightful. Anyway, looking at the other tube, this one was not in the best of shape, and so what I'm doing is I'm just rounding this out by using some deep well sockets. What you can do is just kind of shove this in here and kind of twist. You don't need to use a lot of pressure, but just kind of twist so that it becomes rounded out, and then once this is sliding in and out, you know, fairly easily, then get a slightly larger socket and then kind of repeat the process until it's pretty well rounded out. All right, so I slid this back in here to kind of show you a test fit of how this will work once we cut this off. Now, I kind of think this is too short. There's like a bend here, and also it would require modification of this plastic, as I mentioned earlier. To avoid that, I think I'll just cut it right here. So basically in the middle of the straight part. That gives plenty of material on either side for the hose to go around, and it's out of the way of the cap. This goes over here like this, but you know, there's a lot of room right there. There's plenty of space in there for the screw, so we should be all set. So I'm going to use a little plumber cutoff tool just to make sure that it's a little bit cleaner. This is what the result was from the plunge tool. The oscillating tool, so it's a little ragged. I'd rather have it be square. So let's do that. All right, you can see that's a nice clean cut with no burr. I took a file on the inside, you know, just to kind of make sure it was smooth, and then also right there, that looks like a nice cut. All right, so just doing a test fit. This is basically how it's going to look like. come around to here, hold it up. It's going to come into the firewall like this, come down. There'll be a fitting there and a fitting there. All right, so kind of maneuver the pipes up there and just kind of get them set on there. And what I'm going to do is smear a little silicone lubricant on there so that they slide right on very easily, and then I can tighten down these clamps. All right, so now we're draining the coolant just so that we avoid making a huge mess. So pop this off. There we go, let it drain a little faster. And we'll be reconnecting up our hoses and refilling. So the coolant's back in there. I don't know if you can see it down there in the bottom. I've got a little catch rag here. We're going to go through the bleed procedure before we put everything back in there, like the seat and the steering wheel. Want to still have access before you button everything up, just in case there are leaks anywhere. So let's do that. I like to jack up the car a little bit so it's elevated, so that the air will just more naturally flow out the radiator cap area. Kind of helps speed up the bleed. So you want to have some additional coolant on hand. Just double check your levels in there. You probably can't see it through the thing, but it's at a good level, and you should be good to go. All right, so just letting it bleed. I kind of got a rag just to keep it from vibrating out, but you basically want to just check that. You want to put your heater on full. Make sure it opens up, goes to, and that you're getting heat through. You're going to let it warm up to operating temperature and wait for the thermostat to open. So make sure to get all the air out. And we're checking for leaks. And down here I saw one little drop right at the beginning. And now I'm not seeing anything at all. So that's good. Back in the car. Ignore all these wires. This is for my wideband and other sensors are going through the footwell, and I just kind of pulled them out of the way just to make sure they wouldn't snag. So we look up here and not seeing anything, which is good. And you're gonna want to keep it running until you can feel these lines getting hot, and you're sure that it's run for a while and you've got no leaks. Alright, the fan finally came on, still no leaks. Reservoir's good, level's good. Alright, we should be all set to put it back together. So that about wraps it up. Got everything buttoned back up, except for that last little plastic panel that goes over the heater core itself. I'm going to leave that off for a couple more days. You know, just to kind of check back. It's always a good idea to, when you've changed your coolant or bled it or whatever, to check back, you know, every once in a while for the next few days to see that the levels are right and there's still no leaks. So that will do it. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.